How could the largest empire in the history of humanity disappear? Welcome to Collapse, where giants fall. Today, we're going to dive into the history of a titanic empire, a colossus that dominated the world with an iron grip. From the frozen plains of Siberia to the opulent palaces of Persia, from the endless steppes to the walls of imperial China, the Mongol Empire conquered everything in its path. But no reign is eternal. Get ready to trace back the thread of this decline, to explore the invisible fractures of a giant with feet of clay, and to discover the enemy that destroyed it without ever firing a single arrow. But before embarking on a new adventure, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Thank you and bon voyage. At the very beginning of the 13th century, the vast plains of Central Asia, today known as the Mongolian steppe, offer a landscape both grandiose and unforgiving. Under a harsh climate, alternating between freezing winters and scorching summers, stretch endless horizons whose sparse grass feeds horses and livestock. It is on this territory that various nomadic tribes meet, perpetuating ancestral traditions. Far from being homogeneous, this mosaic of clans lives on herding, hunting, and bartering, constantly moving in search of pastures. Each of these peoples has its own chief, its own alliances, and sometimes maintains ancient rivalries that can lead to violent skirmishes. Yet, it is precisely in this hostile environment that an empire destined to leave a lasting mark on history will be born. Around the Mongolian steppes, several regional powers share control of Eurasia. To the southeast, China, fragmented among different dynasties, including the Jin and further the Song, develops a brilliant civilization and flourishing cities. To the west, the Muslim empires of Central Asia, also subdivided into political military entities, dominate strategic trade routes. Further north, the Russian principalities experience uneven growth, sometimes under Byzantine cultural influence. At the very beginning of the 13th century, none of these powers seemed to predict the arrival of a great conqueror from the Mongolian plains. Yet it is indeed in 1206 that Temujin will be proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal sovereign, a key event that will serve as the starting point for the formation of the largest contiguous empire in history. To understand this rise, one must first delve into the world of the Mongol tribes before Genghis Khan. The major clans bear names that will later resonate in imperial history: Borjigines, Taichud, Merkit, Naiman. They are characterized by a social organization based on family ties and a council of elders. Each member must contribute to the collective survival, whether in herding, hunting, or protecting the camp. The spoils collected during attacks against neighbors are generally shared, but these raids remain sporadic. Despite this tradition of raiding, there exists no central authority to unite these clans, frequently at war with each other. The economy relies mainly on bartering, the exchange of livestock, and artisanal products, as the Mongols do not mint their own currency, preferring a logic of self-sufficiency allied to modest commercial exchanges. Despite their relative isolation, these tribes sometimes make contact with their Chinese neighbors. As early as the 12th century, some caravans venture north to trade skins, furs, and beasts of burden for tea, silk, or metal. At this time, China has already established a monetary system for several centuries using metallic currency, mainly in copper. The Mongol herders, little accustomed to the formal use of coins, are nevertheless getting a first glimpse. Moreover, these commercial exchanges facilitate the spread of religious ideas from various regions. Buddhism, Nestorian Christianity, and Islam make their way into the steppes, coexisting with shamanism, the traditional belief of the Mongol peoples. Temujin was born around 1162, according to some sources, as the son of Yesugei, a clan leader of the Borjigin lineage. His childhood was marked by the uncertainty and violence inherent in tribal life. Upon his father's death, reportedly poisoned around 1170 according to some chronicles, Temujin found himself almost without support. His family, rejected by the clan that did not want to be burdened with orphans, then led a precarious existence on the steppe. These years of hardship forged Temujin's character, forcing him to constantly fight for his survival. He learned very early on to handle the bow and the horse, but also to distrust betrayals, negotiate alliances, and understand the weaknesses of those who claim to be friends. During his adolescence, Temujin forged valuable connections. He established a relationship of trust with Togrul, better known as Ong Khan, leader of the Karaites. Togrul often regarded the young Temujin as an adoptive son, offering him advice and military support. Meanwhile, Temujin maintained a close friendship with Jamuka, another clan leader. These alliances helped to strengthen his reputation and gave him the opportunity to avenge certain humiliations he had suffered. For example, around 1180, he won his first skirmishes, already showing a natural aptitude for strategy and a talent for rallying troops beyond his kinsfolk. His determination was such that many warriors chose to follow him, attracted by his sense of sharing the booty, his military merit, and his commitment to reward those who remained loyal to him faithfully. As he gained prestige, Temujin embraced a vision larger than that of a mere clan leader. Convinced of the necessity to unify the tribes to end fratricidal wars, he began a series of campaigns around the turn of the 1190s and 1200s to subdue or rally the most powerful rivals. Among them, the Naiman and the Merkit were major obstacles. Chronicles report notably that in 1202 he managed to defeat the Merkit, reclaiming part of their herd and their archers. This victory was followed by a campaign against the Naiman, renowned for their military strength and extensive alliances. By 1204, Temujin had definitively defeated the Naiman armies, significantly enhancing his aura. To organize these conquests, he established a command system that would become the future strength of the Mongol Empire, the decimal structure. Each military unit was divided into groups of 10, Arban, 100, Zuun, 1,000, Minghan, and 10,000, Tumen. This resulted in a disciplined, responsive army where promotion was based on competence and loyalty rather than familial heritage. This innovative approach was accompanied by a set of strict laws, the Yasa, which governed both military matters, the rights and responsibilities of each individual, and discipline in the field. For many Mongols, this code represented an unprecedented chance for stability while imposing rigorous obedience to their leaders' orders. Temujin's victories over the enemy tribes culminated in 1206, when he was officially proclaimed Genghis Khan during a great Kurultai, assembly of chiefs, on the banks of the Onon River. The title of Universal Sovereign underscored the magnitude of his ambition, now sanctioned by all the major clans. At that precise moment, a new empire was born. Although rudimentary, a first form of administration was established. Genghis Khan appointed associates and loyalists to oversee the subdued populations, secure trade routes, and ensure the regular payment of tributes. The border areas with northern China, administered from fortified posts, then became places of increased contact. There, the Mongols further discovered the metallic currency used by their neighbors. While bartering and livestock raising continued in the steppes, these new coins, especially in copper or silver, took on strategic importance when it came to trade or bribing certain Chinese officials. The establishment of a Mongol Empire in the early 13th century took all regional powers by surprise. Former adversaries, previously comfortable in their local alliances, found themselves forced to deal with the new ruler. Tribes that were previously reluctant to embrace any movement towards unity now saw in Genghis Khan the opportunity to conquer richer lands beyond the steppe. His rise was not solely the result of military skills. It also relied on an extraordinary political and diplomatic sense, as well as on an innovative management of reward and loot. The fair sharing of seized riches, the opportunity to participate in victorious raids, and the swift justice he rendered according to the Yasa continually attracted more warriors to his banner. By the end of 1206, the still nascent Mongol Empire had a major asset, a unified army obeying an undisputed leader, as well as a network of roads and relay stations allowing for the rapid circulation of messengers. Even if Genghis Khan's power was not yet firmly established in the conquered regions, the organization he implemented laid the foundations for an unprecedented military expansion. Upon his election in 1206, Genghis Khan first turned his gaze to the southeast. The Jin dynasty, established in North China since the early 12th century, controlled prosperous cities and agricultural lands rich in grains. For the Mongols, accustomed to the vastness of the steppes, the conquest of these urban areas offered a double advantage. First, access to large grain stocks, essential for the supply of an expanding army. Second, the possibility of seizing silks, luxury items, and metallic currency. Furthermore, the memory of past alliances between the Jin and certain rival Mongol leaders convinced Genghis Khan that he needed to strike this dynasty to prevent any hostile maneuver. As early as 1211, the first skirmishes pitted Mongol cavalry against Jin forces near the Great Wall. Historians report that in 1215, the Mongols launched a major offensive and managed to capture Zhongdu, future Beijing. Genghis Khan's armies were then noted for their remarkable adaptation to siege techniques previously unknown to the steppe warriors. Aware of the limitations of light cavalry against fortified walls, he recruited Chinese and Uyghur engineers, who deployed siege engines such as catapults, capable of shaking enemy fortifications. Likewise, the Mongols did not hesitate to use gunpowder, which China already mastered, to dislodge defenders. This combination of typical Mongol mobility and rudimentary artillery proved formidable. Once the cities were conquered, the victors implemented a tributary system. The subjugated populations had to deliver either agricultural products like grain or millet, or valuable goods such as silk, as well as silver or bronze coins. This nascent financial windfall began to circulate among the Mongol ranks. Although Genghis Khan still favored traditional methods of booty distribution, cattle, horses, furs, he understood that metallic currency facilitated exchanges with Muslim and Chinese merchants already traveling the Silk Road. By the end of the 1210s, the Mongols had established a solid foothold in northern China, securing garrisons and consolidating a tribute collection system, thus preparing the future campaigns that would eventually lead to the complete subjugation of the Jin dynasty. While operations continued sporadically against northern China, a diplomatic incident prompted the invasion of Central Asia. In 1218, a convoy of Mongol merchants was stopped and massacred in Otrar, within Khwarezm. This region, once a major commercial hub, was then governed by Shah Muhammad II. Furious at what he perceived as an insult, Genghis Khan demanded reparation. The Shah's refusal confirmed the diplomatic rupture. In the spring of 1219, the Mongol Khan decided on a large-scale punitive expedition aimed at crushing Khwarezm and opening a new corridor to the west. The campaign proves to be swift. As early as 1220, the major cities of the region fall one after the other: Bukhara, Samarkand, Merv, and Nishapur. Chroniclers recount the speed and effectiveness of the Mongol strategy. The besiegers sometimes set fire to the outskirts of the cities, breached the walls with the help of siege engines, and sappers recruited locally. The accounts emphasize the brutality of the conquerors, who often used terror as a psychological weapon to hasten capitulations. The enemy troops, divided and panicked, are unable to organize coordinated resistance. Beyond these military victories, Genghis Khan establishes a rudimentary administration. He appoints darugachi, a sort of Mongol governors, responsible for overseeing the payment of taxes and tributes. The use of gold and silver currency, already well established in this region, then develops among the Mongols. On one hand, they use it to pay their troops wages. On the other hand, they use it to pay local notables or craftsmen, whose expertise is deemed useful for the continuation of the conquest. The existing fiscal systems in Khwarezm, with their registers and structured taxes, deeply influence the future management of the empire. The Mongols realize the efficiency of these methods and will adopt them for other territories, notably in China in the following decades. Saipi. Bolstered by his successes in Central Asia, Genghis Khan decides to consolidate his regional dominance, but some of his enemies in disarray head towards the northwest. Keen to prevent any resistant strongholds from regrouping, he sends an army to pursue the fleeing troops into the steppes of southern Russia. This incursion, launched around 1222, also serves as an exploratory mission. It allows for the mapping of routes leading to Eastern Europe and tests the resilience of the Russian principalities while identifying potential access to the trade routes crossing the region. In 1223, the Battle of the Khalkha remains a significant episode. The Mongols face a coalition of Russian princes and Cumans, a nomadic people of the steppe. Despite their numerical inferiority, the cavalry of the Mongol Empire prevails due to their mobility and feigned tactics. The victory is complete. The Russian army is routed. After this triumph, the Mongols pragmatically manage the fate of the prisoners. Some, useful for their artisanal knowledge or skills, are incorporated into the Mongol army's retinue. This policy of partial assimilation strengthens the empire by continually providing new skills and diversifying its troops. However, due to a lack of resources and immediate interest, the Mongols do not seek to occupy these territories permanently. In 1223-1224, the recall of certain units for other priority operations leads to the temporary evacuation of the Russian zone. Some local princes, aware of the Mongol threat, nevertheless send embassies and pay a symbolic tribute to preserve their lands. Genghis Khan does not push further in this direction, focusing his efforts on consolidating his conquests in Central Asia and on China, which he considers more urgent priorities. Meanwhile, in the years 1225-1227, Genghis Khan turns his attention once again to northern China, particularly towards the Tanguts, a people living in the northwest of China and governed by the Western Xia dynasty. Despite their apparent submission, these have reportedly supported enemies of the Mongol Empire, thus provoking the Khan's anger. Sources do not agree on the exact circumstances of Genghis Khan's death. Some suggest he succumbed to battle wounds, others that he was taken by illness or simply overcome by age and exhaustion from incessant campaigns. In any case, his death occurs in August 1227 in the midst of a military campaign. In accordance with Mongol traditions, Genghis Khan's burial remains secret, shrouded in myth. Chroniclers recount that his escort eliminated anyone who crossed the funeral procession in order to preserve the final resting place. Several legends still circulate about the exact location of his tomb, none of which can be verified for certain. Beyond the symbolism, the death of the founder raises the question of succession. Yoshi, the eldest son, had already died before 1227, but his own sons nevertheless inherited territories in the western steppe. The three surviving sons of Genghis Khan, Ogatai, Chagatai, and Tolui, had to share the empire. According to the wishes of the deceased, Ogatai was designated the Great Khan, a choice confirmed during a Kurultai, probably in 1229. Chagatai received regions in Central Asia, while Tolui was granted a portion of historical Mongolia and northern China. This distribution, although respecting Genghis Khan's desire for unity, planted the seeds for potential divergences between the family branches, a factor that contributed a few decades later to the fragmentation of the empire into several independent khanates. Despite this impending division, the imperial legacy left by Genghis Khan is colossal. The Mongol army, composed of tens of thousands of seasoned and disciplined cavalrymen, forms the backbone of expansion. A network of relay posts, called Yam, facilitates communication and the rapid movement of couriers. On the spiritual plane, the religious tolerance proclaimed by Genghis Khan is maintained. Everyone can practice the cult of their choice, whether it be Mongolian shamanism, Buddhism, Nestorian Christianity, or Islam, provided they recognize the authority of the Khan. Finally, a point often less discussed in the short term, but essential in the long run, lies in the gradual monetization of the empire. While at the beginning of his reign, Genghis Khan knew almost nothing about metal coins, his conquests in China and Central Asia revealed their utility to him. Mongol garrisons and administrators in the cities gladly kept these coins to pay soldiers, bribe elites, or settle essential supplies for military campaigns. While bartering and the traditional redistribution of booty still dominate the steppes, a first effort of financial management is already emerging. The empire begins to organize tax collection and to use money to stimulate the loyalty of the defeated notables. At Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the imperial throne theoretically passes to his third son, Ogatai, designated Great Khan in 1229. This choice, already anticipated by Genghis Khan, is confirmed by the various princes of the family. Although Chagatai and Tolui retain portions of the territory in Central Asia and Mongolia, Ogatai inherits the supreme authority over the entire empire. His first objective is to stabilize a still young political structure and to continue the conquest work started by his father. Ogatai first strives to strengthen Mongol unity, threatened by possible family quarrels. To give the empire a worthy administrative center, he undertakes the construction of Karakoram, located on the banks of the Orkhon. By 1235, the city's development progresses sufficiently to make it a symbolic place. Palaces, Buddhist temples, and most importantly, stores for tributes collected in conquered regions are built there. Karakoram becomes a magnet for merchants of all origins, and Ogatai's advisors gradually establish offices there to manage daily affairs. To maintain peace within the empire, Ogatai also concludes numerous marriages and partnerships with the Mongol nobility. This is to consolidate the loyalty of clan leaders and to neutralize those who might challenge his authority. In a spirit of continuity, he confirms the religious tolerance advocated by Genghis Khan. Whether they are Muslims, Buddhists, Nestorian Christians, or followers of shamanism, all can serve in the Mongol ranks, provided they recognize the supreme power of the Great Khan. The end of the Jin dynasty quickly becomes one of Oguhtai's priorities. After several campaigns launched by Genghis Khan against northern China, the Jin remain weakened. Oguhtai, in strategic alliance with the southern Song dynasty, eager to overthrow the Jin, their rivals, manages to deliver a decisive blow in 1234. Jin fortresses fall one after the other, and the entirety of northern China comes under Mongol domination. Despite their alliance, the Song soon begin to distrust the growing power of Genghis Khan's sons, foreshadowing future conflicts. Oguhtai simultaneously resumes and amplifies the policy of expansion towards the west. Between 1236 and 1241, the Mongol armies head towards Eastern Europe. Under the leadership of Batu, grandson of Genghis Khan, they attack Kievan Rus, capture several princely cities, then cross the Carpathians to enter Poland and Hungary. On April 9, 1241, the Battle of Legnica in Silesia results in the crushing defeat of a coalition of Polish forces and military orders, notably the Hospitallers and the Templars. Shortly afterward, the Mongols deal another defeat to the Hungarians on the banks of the Sajo River. However, the death of Oguhtai in December 1241 halts the progression, as many military leaders hastily return to Mongolia to partake in the Kurultai, allowing Western Europe to escape a larger-scale invasion. Despite this martial context, Oguhtai does not overlook the increasing importance of the imperial finances. In the conquered regions, there is a great variety of silver, copper, and gold coins, each linked to a specific monetary tradition. The dinars of Central Asia, Chinese bronze coins, the treasures of Russian principalities, or the Turco-Persian Khanates. Oguhtai then establishes small exchange centers in the most important markets, including Karakoram, in order to facilitate the conversion between these different currencies. Muslim, Chinese, and European merchants can thus exchange their money for other precious metals or buy local goods. In the army, the Mongol warriors remain attached to the distribution of booty, mainly in the form of livestock and precious goods. But metallic currency is beginning to play a complementary role in paying some military units and stimulating the adherence of local elites. Taxes and tributes, on the other hand, continue to take the form of agricultural harvests, silks, or animals. Although the empire does not yet have a single currency, the need for greater harmonization is gradually being felt. After Oguhtai's death, the Mongol Empire goes through a period of uncertainty. A latent conflict opposes different factions of the imperial family, each seeking to promote a candidate for the title of Great Khan. Finally, Guyuk, son of Oguhtai, ascends to the throne in 1246, but his reign is very brief. At his death in 1248, the regency is disputed between his mother, Turigen, and other influential members of the imperial entourage. The instability is not resolved until 1251, when Mongke, a descendant of Tolui's branch, is appointed Great Khan. This chaotic succession illustrates both the complexity of Mongol matrimonial alliances and the rivalries between different lineages. The sons of Chagatai, settled in Central Asia, seek to preserve their autonomy. Those of Jochi, notably Batu, reigning over the Golden Horde in the west, also defend their interests. Meanwhile, Tolui's branch, of which Mongke is part, claims preeminence by relying on the military successes of its members, notably Hulagu and Kublai, brothers of Mongke. This tense political climate does not immediately weaken the empire, as the recent conquests have boosted the Mongols' renown. However, court tensions are a precursor of later splits between Khanates. Mongke, aware of the danger, attempts to rally the main power centers around common expansion projects. Under Mongke, the Mongols pursue their military ventures in two major directions. First, in China, where the southern Song dynasty, still independent, proves to be a powerful adversary. Mongke conducts or oversees repeated campaigns starting in 1252-1253, building river fleets and recruiting engineers capable of besieging the fortified cities of the Yangtze Basin. The goal is to systematically conquer the wealthy southern regions, known for their rice fields, silk workshops, and tremendous commercial potential. In parallel, Mongke sends his brother Hulagu to the Middle East to confront the Muslim powers vying for territory there, particularly the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Although the capture of Baghdad in 1258 occurs just after Mongke's death, the planning of the operation is credited to him. He wants to ensure continuity of the empire to the west and secure the major caravan routes linking East Asia to the Mediterranean. Hulagu's settlement in Persia marks a political turning point, as this new domain, while officially subject to the Great Khan, quickly moves towards de facto autonomy. In the territories already under domination, Mongke strengthens the governorates and focuses on forming a more stable administration. Where Genghis Khan and Ögedei had appointed Darugachi to control the collection of taxes, Mongke generalizes and perfects this principle. Local officials collect taxes not only in kind, crops, livestock, but also in precious metal or fabric to meet different logistical and supply needs. The administrative progress initiated under Mongke contributes to strengthening the famous Pax Mongolica, a concept sometimes used to describe the relative stability that reigns on the trade routes of the empire. The YAM, this network of postal relays, is improved. Rest stations with food and replacement horses allow emissaries to cover immense distances quickly. This infrastructure also benefits merchants, whose caravans travel under the protection of a Mongol pass, thus avoiding many arbitrary taxes or brigandage. To better organize resource collection, Mongke conducts censuses in several regions: northern China, Persia, and parts of Central Asia. These surveys allow for estimating the taxable population and calibrating levies. Thanks to these data, the central power can calculate the amount of grain and precious metals likely to be claimed each year. In the same vein, Mongke encourages the beginning of standardization. However, each Khanate, Golden Horde, Chagatai, Ilkhanate, or Chinese region, later Yuan, often continues to use its own metallic currency, adapted to local customs and practices. The Mongols have not yet decreed complete monetary unification, but the fiscal rules become a bit more coherent from one territory to another. It is also during Mongke's reign that the practice of financial compensation for local elites spreads. Rather than sustaining unrest, defeated notables are paid sums in gold or silver, along with other privileges, to secure their loyalty and cooperation. This carrot system, allied with the traditional stick of the Mongol army, consolidates Mongke's authority over the conquered provinces. In 1259, when Mongke dies during a campaign against the Song dynasty, the Mongol Empire has reached its most spectacular extent. It covers a vast geographical arc, from the Yellow Sea to the gates of Europe, and from Siberia to the Hindu Kush Mountains. The Mongol armies, powerful and feared, enjoy organized logistics. The trade routes are relatively secure, which encourages exchanges between the East and the West. Silks, spices, gemstones, and metals circulate along the Silk Road. This period is often called the Pax Mongolica, although sporadic conflicts still exist at the margins of the empire. Financially, the empire has not yet adopted a uniform currency. The use of various metallic coins prevails, ranging from the silver dinars of Transoxiana to Chinese copper coins, along with gold ingots for large-scale transactions. However, the idea of harmonization begins to emerge. This issue will notably be addressed under Kublai Khan, who will take a decisive step by introducing paper money on a large scale in the future Yuan dynasty. Yet, already under Ogadai, Guyuk, and Mengke, the fiscal apparatus is strengthening, gradually structuring an imperial economy capable of supporting military campaigns and paying bureaucracy. When Mengke passes away in 1259, he is engaged in a vast campaign against the Song dynasty in southern China. For years, the Mongols have sought to subdue this last bastion of Chinese resistance, known for its wealth and the density of its fortified cities. However, the sudden disappearance of the Great Khan disrupts the balance of forces, as part of the Mongol army must leave the front to participate in succession negotiations. At the same time, Hulagu, Mengke's brother, has already extended Mongol domination to the Middle East. After conquering Baghdad in 1258, he founds the Ilkhanate, governing Persia and neighboring territories. Officially, he remains subject to the authority of the Great Khan, but in practice, he increasingly acts as an independent sovereign, relying on local administration and the taxation of conquered cities. The succession conflict primarily opposes two claimants: Kublai, established for several years in northern China, and Arik Boka, closer to traditional Mongolia and supported by part of the nomadic elite. Kublai already controls wealthy regions, including the conquered Jin territory, and relies on an advanced infrastructure. His partially Sinicized administration allows him to levy taxes in grain or metallic currency with relative efficiency. He can thus pay his troops and attract competent Chinese officials. Arik Boka, on the other hand, holds on to Karakorum, the traditional capital, a symbol of the authentic heritage of Genghis Khan. His program is based on the defense of nomadic traditions and the influence of the Mongolian aristocracy. The disputes crystallize around the question: should the empire refocus on the steppe from where it originated or adapt to Chinese realities and the considerable resources of the south? After several years of simmering civil war, Kublai eventually triumphs militarily and politically over Arik Boka in 1264. However, this victory does not signify a return to full unity. The other great branches of the imperial family, the Chagatai in Central Asia, the Golden Horde to the west, and Hulagu's Ilkhanate, recognized Kublai only superficially. The idea of a single great Khan remains an official rhetoric, but in reality, each lineage increasingly considers itself free to make its own decisions. This is therefore the beginning of a transition. The empire, once centered on Mongolia, gradually sees its center of gravity shift towards China, where Kublai lays the foundations of a local Mongolian dynasty, the future Yuan dynasty. The first entity to claim quasi-independence is the Chagatai Khanate, whose territory extends from present-day Western Mongolia to the oases of Central Asia. Chagatai, Genghis Khan's second son, received this region as an appanage, and his descendants consolidate power there. The local populations are varied: Turco-Mongolian nomads in the steppe, sedentary Muslim populations in the oases. The economy thus relies on a mix of irrigated agriculture, wheat, cotton, and intensive livestock farming. After the conquest of Baghdad in 1258, Hulagu establishes himself in what becomes the Ilkhanate, covering a large part of Persia, present-day Iraq, and eastern Anatolia. He sets up his administration by relying on local elites, often of Persian or Turkish culture, and on a fiscal apparatus inherited from long-standing Middle Eastern traditions. Cities like Tabriz or Moraga develop under Mongol protection, and the Ilkhanate launches reconstruction projects for Baghdad to make it again an economic hub. Financing this administration and these projects involves maintaining significant fiscal pressure. Taxes are levied on agricultural production, caravan trade, silk, spices, precious metals, and in some cases, wealthy populations are forced to make loans. Simultaneously, Hulagu mints coins with his likeness, dirhams, symbolically asserting his authority. This is an important step in the Khanate's autonomy. By the 1260s, the Ilkhanate distances itself from Kublai Khan, even though it officially acknowledges his suzerainty. Around the same time, the Yochi line, notably represented by Batu Khan and his descendants, establishes its own empire in the steppes of southern Russia and present-day Ukraine, consolidating what is called the Golden Horde. Its capital is Sarai, built on the lower Volga, allowing control over river trade and the imposition of taxes on the movement of goods. Russian princes are vassalized, forced to pay tribute or provide military contingents. Triumphant over his rival Arik Böke, Kublai Khan shifts the nerve center of the empire toward China. He establishes his capital at Khanbalik, the future Beijing, and, in 1271, officially proclaims the Yuan dynasty. This turning point is accompanied by a progressive Sinicization of Mongol power. Kublai adopts certain Chinese rites, surrounds himself with advisors from the high Confucian bureaucracy, and takes an interest in the rich administrative heritage of the Song. In this context, he encourages the formation of regional governors, the establishment of exams to recruit competent officials, and the centralization of fiscal and judicial services. Symbolic transition is also reflected in urban planning. Khanbalik becomes a metropolis where Chinese, Mongolian, Muslim, and even European districts coexist, as Venetian or Genoese merchants settle there to profit from the prevailing prosperity. One of Kublai's most notable military achievements remains the submission of the Southern Song dynasty. Since the 1260s, he launched several campaigns to besiege their cities. Between 1276 and 1279, thanks to a trained Chinese navy and the use of advanced siege strategies, catapults, siege towers, rudimentary artillery, the Mongols managed to force the surrender of Hangzhou, then one of the largest metropolises in the world. A few years later, Guangzhou is integrated into the empire. The conquest concludes in 1279 with the naval battle of Yamen. The vast resources of the south, rice, silk, porcelains, thus help fuel Kublai's power and bolster his reign. Kublai Khan's court embodies unprecedented pluralism. The sovereign solicits Chinese advisors, often from the former Song administration, but also Tibetans, Turks, Persians, and even scholars from Europe, attracted by commercial growth. However, the Mongolian nobility remains at the top of the state's hierarchies, in accordance with the ethnic status policy established by the Yuan dynasty. The population is generally classified into four categories: Mongols, Central Asians or Semites, Northern Chinese, and finally Southern Chinese, considered the most recent subjects. This compartmentalization impacts access to official positions and taxation. Upon taking power, Kublai strives to reform the economy to better unify it. He promotes paper money, called chow, as the main medium of exchange. The administration promises to keep sufficient reserves of gold and silver in state granaries to guarantee the value of these bills. Taxes can be paid in kind, rice, tea, salt, silk, and in cash. Officially, this policy facilitates trade across the territory while allowing tighter control of financial flows. In practice, however, everything depends on the public's trust, and the Yuan authorities' ability to maintain a balance between issued notes and metallic reserves. To assert his authority and promote the circulation of goods, Kublai Khan initiates major works. He notably undertakes the reorganization of the Grand Canal, connecting present-day Beijing to the grain-producing regions of the south. New roads, bridges, and postal relays reinforce the Mongolian legacy of the Pax Mongolica, ensuring safer and faster travel. On the coasts, the empire supports the development of commercial fleets, opening maritime routes to Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean. Kublai's entourage seeks to be a melting pot of advisors from various cultures. Some, like the Muslim Ahmad Fanakati, play a major role in financial management and tax collection. However, this mix generates discontent among Confucian scholars, who feel their traditional prerogatives are diminished. Similarly, Han Chinese, numerous in the administrative apparatus, sometimes encounter a glass ceiling. Considered conquered subjects, they rarely attain the highest positions. These internal tensions, long contained by the efficiency of the state apparatus, will resurface during the dynasty's decline. The Yuan court encourages the arts and the exchange of ideas. Tibetan Buddhism, close to Mongolian shamanism in its relationship to the sacred, receives strong support. Painters, poets, and craftsmen from southern China mingle with Persian astrologers and Muslim architects. The account of Marco Polo, who arrives in Khanbalik in 1275, reflects the fascination exerted by this brilliant and cosmopolitan court. The Venetian describes sumptuous palaces, a highly efficient postal system, and a surprising use of paper money, then unprecedented in Europe. In the early phase of Kublai's reign, the use of Chao inspires considerable confidence. Each note is theoretically exchangeable for gold or silver at official exchange offices. Urban merchants and notables, facing a high demand for liquidity, use these notes for payment. This dynamic supports the commercial boom and economic vitality, particularly in major cities like Beijing, Hangzhou, or Guangzhou. Reign of Kublai Khan attracts foreign delegations, coming to seal alliances or take advantage of Chinese prosperity. Muslim and Italian merchants, in particular, bring back raw materials or exotic products, hoping to resell them in European or Middle Eastern markets. To settle their transactions, they often accept the Chao before converting part of their income into silver or gold to transfer outside China. However, this constant outflow of precious metals begins to weaken the official reserves. The Yuan government then has to issue more bills to cover its expenses, fueling an initial monetary tension. The failed invasions of Japan in 1274 and 1281 weigh heavily on the imperial treasury. The naval preparations, the mobilization of soldiers, and the losses suffered during the storms, the famous kamikaze, lead to enormous expenses. To cover these needs, the Yuan government launches the printing of additional Chao, without having sufficient reserves to back them. In the conquered south, tax pressure intensifies, causing occasional revolts. Local populations complain about the administrative complexity and the rise in taxes, which are used to fund both the army and the luxurious imperial court. In the decade 1280-1290, Kublai Khan still engages in expeditions in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Burma, Champa, without any lasting success. These campaigns further strain the budget. At the same time, the court embarks on monumental projects: expansion of the imperial palace in Beijing, grand banquets, mobilization of artisans. The issuance of paper money then becomes less strict, initiating a progressive inflation. The real value of the Chao declines against gold or silver, which many merchants prefer to keep in reserve rather than exchange. After Kublai Khan's death in 1294, the Yuan dynasty experiences a period of instability. Between the end of the 13th century and the early decades of the 14th, 8 emperors succeed each other in 40 years. This waltz of sovereigns reflects the rivalries of the court, where officer corruption undermines central authority. Each new emperor aims to consolidate his power. To do so, he distributes pensions and privileges, further inflating state expenditures. Meanwhile, the government tries to reconquer certain regions of Southeast Asia that were lost, or difficult to control, such as Vietnam or Burma, and faces internal rebellions. These wars prove particularly costly. To cover these expenses, the Yuan emperors do not hesitate to increase the issuance of paper money. Yet, the more chow that are printed without adequate reserves in gold, silver, or goods, the greater the risk of inflation. Over the years, the Yuan court issues new series of chow. Initially, each bill was supposed to be exchangeable for an equivalent value in precious metals or basic products stored in state granaries. But the multiplication of issues, without sufficient backing, creates an artificial situation. The precious metal reserves, already depleted by military expenses and the outflow of silver from China, can no longer cover the mass of circulating paper money. To support this system, the Yuan state mandates that taxes be paid in bills. The populations often have no choice but to use a currency whose value is depreciating. While in theory, this gives the state a monopoly, in practice, the public's confidence quickly erodes. Foreign merchants, so far relatively willing to use the cow, start demanding payment in gold or silver for larger transactions. Ingots then leave China, worsening the situation. With less precious metals to support the paper currency, its value begins to plummet. The prices of basic goods soar, and peasants and artisans struggle to procure supplies. Thus, by the first third of the 14th century, an inflationary spiral sets in, fueled by the widespread doubt regarding the Yuan bills. In response to the continuous depreciation of the cow, the Yuan government adopts a radical measure. It launches a new series of bills, meant to replace the old ones, sometimes declared obsolete overnight. This sudden annulment causes panic among residents who find themselves with cow suddenly deprived of validity. The public trust, already weakened, collapses. Everyone rushes to money, gold, or bartering, hoping to preserve their wealth. In just a few years, paper money loses most of its value. A bill meant to buy a fixed amount of rice only allows for the purchase of a tenth or even a hundredth of that quantity. This hyperinflation particularly affects impoverished urban and rural populations, while the wealthiest elites sometimes profit from speculation. For peasants, the situation is dire. They must pay taxes and bills, while their value constantly fluctuates. Tax collectors often demand more to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. Unable to pay, some lose their lands, taken over by large landowners or local lords who impose payments in kind, grains, livestock, to protect themselves from bill volatility. Peasants sometimes find themselves coerced into serfdom or fleeing. The educated or merchant elites, on the other hand, hoard money or gold to escape devaluation. Some engage in speculation. They quickly exchange bills for tangible goods, silk, grains, metals, further fueling price increases. In the cities, misunderstanding and anger simmer, fueled by the skyrocketing cost of living. Cornered, the Yuan emperors attempt various reforms. They enact laws to restrict the circulation of gold and silver, attempt to enforce a fixed rate for chow, and carry out reissues in new formats. In vain, each measure increases public distrust and uprisings multiply. A portion of the Mongol elites, already weakened by court corruption, sees their incomes dwindle with the collapse in paper money value. Within the army, demoralization is spreading. The officers, poorly paid, allow indiscipline to prevail. Peasant rebellions find fertile ground in a climate where inflation symbolizes all the dynasty's dysfunctions. Amidst famines and impoverishment, numerous rebel bands emerge in the central regions of the Yellow River in the early 14th century. Secret societies, like the White Lotus, advocate a return to a form of social purity and a rejection of the Mongol foreign domination. The nascent Chinese nationalist discourse plays on the people's resentment towards the Yuan dynasty, considered responsible for inflation and misery. Uprisings emerge sporadically, but gradually, some rebel leaders manage to unite significant forces. Inflation acts as a catalyst. The populations, seeing their savings reduced to nothing, turn to local leaders capable of restoring stability. Zhu Yunzhang, the future founder of the Ming dynasty, is one of these leaders. Coming from a modest background, he first joins a local rebel movement before leading a growing army. He manages to channel popular frustration by promising fairer fiscal reforms and denouncing the Yuan's monetary madness. From town to town, he expands his territory, gaining the support of merchants, former Chinese officials, and impoverished peasants. His rise occurs step by step, controlling grain silos, securing roads, forming alliances with other rebellious leaders. Facing these revolts, the Yuan government launches repression campaigns. But the army, weakened by corruption and the difficulty in properly funding its troops, struggles to contain the uprisings. Fiscal reforms are hastily announced. A reduction in taxes is promised. A monetary system overhaul is contemplated. Too late and too little. Distrust is already ingrained, and rebels continue to advance. The Yuan dynasty finds itself caught in a vice. On one hand, lacking funds to maintain authority. On the other, any attempt to issue more bills to replenish funds accelerates currency depreciation. Within a few years, the rebel movement seize key centers, notably in the Yangtze Basin and Central Plains. They secure control of grain silos, vital for feeding their troops and gaining the trust of local populations. Commercial roads, once essential to the empire, sometimes fall into the hands of insurgents. Merchants, tired of economic instability, view favorably the arrival of authorities promising more stable management. The urban population, crushed by the devaluation of the chow, supports these movements, hoping for a return to a more reliable form of currency. In the accounts of the time, one often finds the idea that the rebels presented themselves as restorers of order against the Yuan monetary drifts. The Mongol army, once formidable, is now fragmented. Officers vie for the meager resources of the state, while others desert due to lack of pay. Internal divisions among Mongol noble families weaken the whole. Without a stable budget, logistics break down. Feeding thousands of soldiers becomes impossible, especially since some large agricultural estates side with the rebels. The Yuan generals, attempting to buy mercenaries or reform an exhausted system, fail to stem the advance of Zhu Yunzhang and his allies. From then on, the defeat of the Yuan dynasty in China seems inevitable. From the 1350s, Zhu Yuanzhang brings together several rebel armies under his command. He presents himself as the defender of the people and Chinese cultural heritage in the context of widespread rejection of Mongol rule. Gradually, he conquers important urban centers, sometimes without much resistance, so strong is the discredit of the Yuan court. In 1368, his troops reach Khanbalik. The Mongol emperor, unable to resist, flees north. Zhu Yuanzhang enters the capital and proclaims the birth of the Ming dynasty, crowning himself emperor under the name Hongwu. Aware of the harmful role played by yuan hyperinflation, Zhu Yuanzhang decides to gradually eliminate the bills inherited from the Mongol administration. He reinstates a monetary system based on metallic currency, mainly copper for small transactions and silver for larger amounts. This more tangible anchorage aims to restore public confidence. At the same time, he implements strict controls on monetary issuance. No one can print bills without the express authorization of the state, and the Ming government strives to maintain the real value of metallic currency. These measures, coupled with an agricultural revival and land redistribution to certain peasants, quickly stabilize the economy. Inflation recedes, and the new dynasty strives to erase all traces of the Yuan financial policy. The Mongol nobles, fleeing the wrath of the population and the advance of the Ming, retreat to the steppe. There, they continue to consider themselves the legitimate Yuan dynasty, under the name Northern Yuan, but their grip on China is over. In a few years, the already weakened Mongol administrative apparatus disintegrates completely south of the Great Wall. The Ming establish new governors and strengthen their power, explicitly rejecting the experience of uncontrolled paper money that precipitated the downfall of their predecessors. After 1368, the Mongols retreat to Mongolia proper, where they establish the so-called Northern Yuan dynasty. They occasionally attempt to reconquer China without lasting success. Deprived of the immense resources that had been the strength of their empire, they partially return to a nomadic life, divided into several scattered chiefdoms. The dream of a great Eurasian confederation, maintained for a century, fades with the rise of new regional powers, particularly the Ming China, which aims to erase the traces of an episode perceived in Chinese historiography as a barbaric interlude. The collapse of the Chinese branch of the Mongols, once considered the richest and most prestigious, deprives the other khanates of their symbolic reference. Deprived of this imperial cement, the Ilkhanate, the Golden Horde, or the Chagatai Khanate continue their respective histories, but without coordination or a sense of belonging to the same universal empire. The Pax Mongolica begins its decline. Less oversight and more inter-Khanate tensions reduce the security of trade routes. The Ilkhanate, established in Persia after the fall of Baghdad in 1258, was one of the pillars of the Mongol Empire. At its peak, under Ghazan Khan and Oljetu, it benefited from an efficient administration, a flourishing trade, and a relatively stable monetary policy. Unlike the Yuan of China, the Ilkhanate did not venture into the massive issuance of paper money, preferring a system based on quality silver coins, which inspired confidence among regional merchants. Tabriz and Baghdad were prosperous economic centers, connected to the major caravan routes of Central Asia and the Mediterranean. However, after Oljetu's death in 1316, unity began to fracture. The court, plagued by factional struggles, gradually lost control over its local governors. The absence of a strong power paved the way for the territory to splinter into several rival principalities, and by 1335, the Ilkhanate had completely disappeared. Persia then fragmented, giving rise to local dynasties, while trade declined and economic stability disintegrated. The Golden Horde, meanwhile, stretched over the vast Russian steppes and commanded a tribute network imposed on Slavic principalities. Unlike the Yuan, it never chose paper money, preferring a monetary system based on silver dirhams and gold dinars, partly minted in Sarai, its capital. Its economy relied on the trade of furs, slaves, and grains, with the Volga playing a central role in the circulation of goods. Under Uzbek Khan, at the beginning of the 14th century, Islam became the dominant religion, strengthening diplomatic ties with the Muslim world. Yet, despite its relative stability, the Golden Horde eventually split into several independent khanates: Crimea, Kazan, Astrakhan. These new entities, increasingly focused on their own interests, gradually ceased to recognize the authority of a single Khan. In parallel, Moscow, once a vassal of the Mongols, gained power and began to challenge their dominance. The Chagatai Khanate, in the heart of Central Asia, was the most heterogeneous of the Mongol states. Spanning from the steppes of western Mongolia to the oases of Transoxiana, it brought together a mosaic of Turco-Mongol, Persian-speaking, and Uyghur peoples, with deeply different ways of life. Unlike Yuan China or the Golden Horde, it did not have a unified monetary system. In prosperous cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, silver coins inspired by Persian models were minted, while in the steppes, bartering remained dominant. The absence of a strong central power fostered incessant internal conflicts, with each warlord seeking to impose his authority. Furthermore, Islam progressed among the sedentary elites, causing tensions with the Mongols, who remained attached to shamanic traditions. As these divisions deepened, the Khanate weakened, paving the way for the emergence of a new regional player, Tamerlane, who would soon redraw the map of Central Asia. By the mid-14th century, no central power could claim to embody the Mongol Empire as a whole. The Khanates acted as independent, sometimes rival kingdoms. Barely 90 years after the death of Genghis Khan, the vast empire he had built disintegrated, giving way to a mosaic of local powers. Neither the Chinese branch, nor the Golden Horde, nor the Ilkhanate, nor the Chagatai Khanate had the means to claim the total legacy of the universal sovereign. Genghis Khan was no more than a revered ancestor within competing dynasties. In less than 2 centuries, the Mongol Empire transformed from a conquering force, unifying much of Eurasia, to a myriad of independent khanates, each following its path. In the Chinese branch, poor mastery of paper money and oversized expenditures accelerated the end of the Yuan dynasty, overthrown by popular anger and the rise of a new Han elite. The other khanates, deprived of the prestige of Mongol China, sank into their own difficulties between local revolts, internal wars, and religious transformations. Thus closes the history of an empire as fleeting as it was gigantic, whose fall illustrates how a failing monetary management can ignite social tensions and lead to the downfall of an otherwise flourishing regime.